and welcome to another episode of the Star Sitdown. My name is Kim Davis Jr., the podcast editor at the Star, and today we have a very special guest. He is a former congressman, the founder of Powered by People, a Texas politics professor at Texas State University. Try saying that 3 times. But I am pleased to welcome Mr. Beto O'Rourke. How are you doing today, Mr. O'Rourke?
Kim, I'm doing good. Please call me Beto. I'm here in El Paso, and I actually just went downtown with my wife to get signed up to become a volunteer deputy registrar so I can help to register voters in El Paso. So I feel good about that. Our kids are in the house doing their distance learning for school, and very thankfully we're all healthy. And so things are good. Things are good.
Has your family and yourself been vaccinated yet?
No. Well, my mom has been vaccinated, and my wife Amy's parents have both been vaccinated. Amy and I are scheduled to get our first shots tomorrow, if all goes well. So I'm looking forward to that. How about you?
I have gotten my first vaccination shot on the 22nd. I get my second one on the 12th, and I'm looking forward to that as well. You know, this pandemic has been tough, but it feels good to start to see the end of it. Let me start to get into more like Texas State. I see you wearing your Texas State cap. What's it been like teaching at Texas State this first semester?
It's been great. I knew it was going to be good because I had visited San Marcos so many times as a candidate, and even made some visits to the campus. And in every one of those engagements and town halls, I got really good questions, really good criticism sometimes, really thoughtful ideas about where Texas is, where the country is, what it will take to get it in a better place. And so I knew that the level of intellectual rigor and intellectual honesty in the discussions that are had at Texas State was going to be present in this class. I knew that there's a real intellectual curiosity on top of that to better understand how things work, why they work this way, what it would take to make them work a different way. And all that I've seen in this class so far. What I could not have anticipated, which has been such a pleasant surprise, was my co-teacher, my co-professor is Dr. Sherry Mora from the political science department, who is just phenomenal. I've been in politics for a long time, right? But I have learned so much about Texas politics by reading what she's written, having conversations with her as we designed the class, and then just having a chance to take in what she's teaching in the class. She's phenomenal. And then the students are just absolutely terrific. And these are tough classes, and these are the questions posed very often don't have an easy answer. But just as often, the students who pose them are themselves willing to try to answer them. So I'm learning a lot, not just from Dr. Mora, but from the students who are part of this class. I've been so impressed and just feel extraordinarily lucky to be doing this.
In a politically divisive time, you know, a lot of people are left or right, and it's very polarizing. How has it been taking your political experience and giving it to students during this politically divisive time?
You know, where it's applicable, I will share, stories from the road, what it's like to serve in Congress, what it's like to campaign for Senate, what it's like to be a member of the El Paso City Council. But I also want to make sure that we're bringing in other experiences as well. So we recently had former statewide elected land commissioner Jerry Patterson, who was also a state senator, who is a very conservative Republican and who has his own set of experiences and stories and perspectives that he was able to share with the class. I think that adds value, but to be honest with you, the conversations we have just as Texans about what's happening in the state, the research that these students are doing we're discussing voting rights right now, Kim, and we're specifically looking at the process of redistricting and gerrymandering in Texas. And in our class today, we just had class a couple of hours ago, the students came prepared with really deep research they had done into specific Supreme Court cases, none of which were assigned, by the way, for the reading for the class. So I picked up a lot from that. I think there's maybe an equal sharing of experiences and perspective going back and forth that makes that a stronger class.
Where do you see education and being an educator fitting into like your plans going forward? And do you see yourself potentially coming back to Texas State for next semester?
I would love to. And, to the degree that I'm helpful in sharing this lived experience as a, member of Congress or as a candidate or someone who's involved in politics in Texas and discussions about policy and elections, and in this instance, voting rights, to the degree that that's adding some value to Texas State, and Texas State sees that, I would love to continue to do this. I certainly get a lot out of it. And I mentioned learning from the students, learning from my co-professor, Dr. Mora, but also learning how to better teach and better connect with students in the classroom and better help them achieve what their goals are outside of the classroom. And for many of them, they're beginning to think about running for political office or being involved in a political campaign or getting behind a cause or trying to bring change on a given issue. And it's, for me, it's really exciting to be there for those conversations and in some small way to be helpful as these students start thinking about next steps, especially when it comes to steps that would involve public service or being more civically engaged.
Okay. I wanted to ask you as well, in terms of like the broader scale of things. This past month has been rough in terms of, mass shootings. There was one in Atlanta, Georgia. There was one in Boulder, Colorado. And you have famously said, hell yes, we will take your AR-15s, and you have strong feelings about these sorts of weapons. However, there's been very much of an apprehension of change locally and federally for these policies. So why do you think that is, and how can we make a change as students and as Texans?
Kim, I'd add to it that in Texas, you've had 4 of the worst mass shootings in U.S. history. And, I can think of Santa Fe High School, Sutherland Springs, Midland, Odessa, and just before the Midland, Odessa shootings and murders, you had 23 people murdered here in El Paso by a young man carrying an AK-47, a weapon that was initially designed for war, for use in combat, to kill enemy soldiers, to shoot them and to keep them down, because that high impact, high velocity round, it shreds everything inside of you. You bleed out in most cases before you can be helped and revived and saved. And that's exactly what happened to 23 people with whom I live in this community not even 2 years ago. So in the simplest terms that I can understand, that makes sense to me, weapons of war belong on a battlefield. Civilian firearms, shotgun, a rifle, a pistol, something that you use for self-defense or for hunting or target practice or sport, that makes sense for us to be able to purchase them after going through a comprehensive background check. It makes sense to be able to own them responsibly, subject to what they used to call red flag laws, but are now called extreme risk protection order laws, where if you are potentially a danger to yourself or a danger to someone else, we can protect you and those around you by making sure that you don't use that firearm against yourself or somebody else. And then I think something that a lot of people, including gun owners and Republicans as well as non-gun owners and Democrats, can agree on is at least stopping the sale of assault weapons and weapons of war. None of these would stop every instance of gun violence, to be clear, but all of them together would significantly reduce the rate that we're seeing people die of gun violence. It would make us a little bit safer and a little saner. And they just make these proposals just make a tremendous amount of common sense and seem to be supported across party lines, across geographic lines. It's just, you ask this question, why aren't we seeing this take place, or why is there not movement? It really ultimately depends on the political will of those in positions of power and public trust. And I see evidence that that's changing and improving, but from my perspective, it's not happening quickly enough.
Do you feel that on some level, politicians have become desensitized to these mass shootings since they happen so frequently? And it appears to be the same thing. Shooting happens, people send thoughts and prayers, it becomes a debate, and then we move on and it goes on to the next one. Do you feel as if there's some sort of desensitization?
I think you're right, and not just for politicians. I think for the general public, if this is the environment in which you were raised, if this is what you have been conditioned to expect, then you can be forgiven for not seeing past this and thinking that you can have something better than 100 of our fellow Americans killed every single day by gun violence. And it may also have something to do with this, Kim. It's not everyone who is suffering equally due to gun violence. Disproportionately, Black and brown Americans are victims of gun violence. Disproportionately in the state of Texas, you have women who are dying at a far higher rate and being shot at a far higher rate than there are in other states, very often by their domestic partners and people who should not have a firearm because they have a proven record of being violent towards that woman or that person in their life. I think that has something to do with it as well. And then you've got a very well-funded, politically active gun manufacturing lobby that is literally willing to pay members of Congress for their complicity in this and their acquiescence and the reinforcement of this as a norm, that it's somehow normal that so many of us have to die in this way. When you don't see this really in almost any other developed nation or any other, wealthy nation, which used to be referred to as the first world developed countries. But when we look at our peers, in other words, we are an outlier, and it does not have to be this way.
Have the words of citizens and people in the community that you represent and people that you talk to and the service that you do with Powered by People, does that match kind of the sentiment that GOP lawmakers have been saying about gun violence, or do you think it's kind of disproportionate in the community as opposed to what people are saying in offices?
Are you asking me if gun violence is worse in our communities than we're being told by our public servants?
What I'm asking is what people that you've heard, whether it be Austin, El Paso, all over the state of Texas, their sentiments about gun violence and restrictions, is that the same as what you've been hearing from big GOP lawmakers?
In some instances, it will be the same. And folks, maybe because it's convenient, will adopt the same talking points about, firearms or the Second Amendment or gun violence. What I have found where you really see the disconnect between, the lived experience and the politically convenient talking point is by listening to people who have survived gun violence or who have lost somebody to gun violence. Talk to one of the surviving family members of a victim from the Walmart shooting in El Paso, and they perhaps have the most basis in this conversation. Their perspective on whether you should own an AK-47 or an AR-15, given what it was able to do to their family member. I think that's worth listening to. And yes, very often I will hear a disconnect there, or you listen to the leaders of March for Our Lives or the membership of Moms Demand Action. So many of those moms, by the way, that I've met in San Marcos and in Austin and San Antonio and in points beyond, they lost their child to gun violence. They had a son or a daughter who was killed or took their own lives with a firearm, and realize now that it didn't have to be that way and that there's much that we can do with our laws. And it begins by informing one another, educating one another about the true cost and consequence of the status quo. That real experience breaks you out of those talking points and whatever the polling says on this stuff real quick. And it's always where I want to be as someone who's interested in policy and politics and elections and the course that this country is going to take. Whoever's most affected by a given issue, I want to make sure that we're listening to them first and foremost. Whoever's bearing the brunt of current policy, let's make sure that their voice is at least heard and is part of the conversation. And for far too long, it really has been the NRA and the gun lobby and the politicians who traffic in their talking points who've been able to command the conversation. Now with the rise of March for Our Lives, Moms Demand, Brady, Giffords, other great groups, you're really starting to see, and hear the voices of survivors and firsthand witnesses to gun violence. I think that, Kim, is changing the dynamic in the debate. I think it's part of the reason that you've seen the House of Representatives pass gun sense legislation, universal background checks, and why there's a decent chance that the Senate will do the same.
So kind of going in that direction in terms of elections, and you said you were talking about voting rights in your classes. So there's a big discussion right now about voter suppression. And we had wanted to do a podcast on March 26th, and you were in Austin opposing Senate Bill 7. And there have been many people on either side of Senate Bill 7 and what it means for Texans. And there are Democrats who say, this is voter suppression. This is the new Jim Crow. And there are people that are Republicans that are saying this is more about having more stable elections and having more integrity in our elections in a response to the last part of Donald Trump's presidency and saying, the election was rigged and whatnot. So can you talk to people a little bit more about Senate Bill 7 and what it means for Texans?
There's two bills, Senate Bill 7, as you said, and then House Bill 6, HB 6, combined present the greatest attack on access to the ballot box in Texas in at least a decade. When you connect them, however, to the voter suppression bills that just passed in Georgia and voter suppression bills that are pending in 41 other state legislatures across the country, it truly does represent the single greatest concerted attack on democracy in America since the Voting Rights Act was passed in 1965. And Kim, I provide that context because some folks may be wondering, how in the world are people using the phrase Jim Crow, which described America pre-Civil Rights Act, pre-Voting Rights Act, and many would assume that in no way resembles America today. The attacks that we've seen on voting rights, if sustained, will represent a rollback that will take us literally back to some of the same access challenges that Black Americans, Mexican Americans, and communities of color across the country faced prior to our fellow Texan and a graduate of Texas State, Lyndon Baines Johnson's Voting Rights Act of 65. So what do? Under the guise of standardizing elections across Texas, these bills would significantly limit the ability to vote by mail. They would significantly limit the ability to vote early. They would prohibit many shift workers, meaning, you've got a shift that ends at 2 a.m. or 4 a.m. or 6 a.m. from being able to vote because they're at work when the new set hours take place under this legislation. It makes it harder on the disabled to participate. Their caregivers who help them fill out a ballot will now have to present some kind of voter ID to help them do that. Imagine if you're, the person helping you fill out that ballot is your 7-year-old grandson or, some other family member who doesn't have and should not have to have voter ID. But it also has this really chilling effect of allowing so-called poll watchers free reign inside the place where elections are held throughout this state, even allowing them to videotape voters as they go in. And what we know from the history of voter suppression in Texas is that those quote unquote poll watchers very often target lower income voters, first-time voters who may be, a little bit anxious about voting in the first place, and voters of color. That's been the tradition in the state in an attempt to intimidate them from voting at all. And so I would put this in the larger context of other efforts that sound seemingly innocuous. So right now they're talking about standardizing voting procedures in Texas. In the poll tax era, 100 years ago, it was just, every Texan should pay a little bit of money and have a receipt for having paid that tax before voting. In the days of the literacy test, it was this common sense idea that, everybody should be able to read before they vote. Who could argue with that? In the era of voter ID, everyone should have some kind of photo identification. It's only when we look at how those laws were applied and who they affected that, the literacy test was really only asked of Black voters to keep them from voting. Voter ID, you can't use your ID from Texas State to prove who you are at your polling place, but you can use your license to carry a firearm to prove who you are at your polling place. When we get into the details, we understand that the effect of legislation like this is to keep voters of color from participating at full strength. And that keeps us from being a full democracy in Texas. That's why this is so pernicious, and that's why it has to be stopped.
So I wanted to ask you as well. So as a country, we pride ourselves in voting for elected officials, and, it's your right to vote, and, just democracy as a whole. So when that's the idea of being an American, how do you go about the gerrymandering and the attempts to suppress voters and their voices so that way politicians can stay in power?
I wish more people were outraged, frankly, because you're absolutely right. You can't both be purportedly the world's greatest democracy and then effectively and functionally keep so many tens of millions of your fellow Americans out of this democracy, whether it's the racial gerrymander, the 750 polling place closures in Texas concentrated in the fastest growing Black and brown neighborhoods, whether it is the voter ID laws that we discussed earlier, or having one ballot drop-off box per county, including in Harris, where you have more than 4 million people, which makes it nearly impossible for many who depend on that form of voting to participate at all. You can't have it both ways. And you also can't then go out to the rest of the world and preach democracy and preach full political participation when you don't allow it at home and you don't allow it in Texas. And unfortunately, I hate to say this as a proud Texan and someone who so loves this state, but it is harder to register to vote and it is harder to vote in the state of Texas than it is in any other state in the union. We should be first. We should be the easiest in which to vote. We should have the highest level of voter participation and turnout. And whether that ends up electing Republicans or Democrats, that actually doesn't matter as much to me as making sure that we have the right to vote and that we can exercise it. That is missing in Texas right now.
So we are running short on time. So I'm going to leave you with two questions and then we'll wrap up. This one is a personal one for me, one that I would love to get your perspective on in terms of the future of this country. There are many Americans now who've seen the cracks in our democracy and are outraged at the lack of health care and the clear voter suppression and just disenfranchisement of certain groups. And they become very bleak and unhopeful about the future of this country and who really has the power and the gain and distrust in our own elections. So what would you, as a proud American, a proud Texan, say to those people who have lost hope in democracy and who think the future isn't as bright as they would like it to be?
I'd tell you that I'd first acknowledge you have every right to be tempted by this despair, given what we're seeing in this country right now. It's nothing to turn your back on or to ignore or to pretend that it doesn't exist or to be naive about how easy or hard it's going to be to fix. This is tough. We have not had a fight for our democracy in like this in your lifetime or in my lifetime. The best antidote, however, to despair is action. If you are outraged, and you should be, and if you're not paying attention. If you're outraged, you've got to channel that into action. I mentioned at the outset of the interview, my wife Amy and I just got back from the county elections department in El Paso, where we signed up to become volunteer deputy registrars. We're going to go out and knock on the doors of our neighbors, find those who are not yet registered, and help them get registered. Add them to the rolls. Make sure they know the rules to participate and to vote, and that they turn out in the next election. Senate Bill 7 and House Bill 6 have not passed, and they don't have to pass. And to some degree, those legislators hearing your voice, getting your phone call, having you show up personally at their office, that could potentially change the course of this legislation and prevent it from being passed. And then maybe turn this around and start working on expanding access to the franchise and making sure that more of our fellow Texans can vote. I'd also encourage anyone who has the slightest inkling to run for office to start making plans to do it. Now is the time. There'll never be a perfect moment to engage. You'll never have the perfect resume, be the perfect age, have the perfect set of skills or experience. But what you have is the initiative and the resolve to help this country at its moment of truth. And that matters more than anything else, in my opinion. So what I have found is that when I'm in motion, when I'm taking action, when I'm combining the action I take with the action that others are willing to take, you become part of something really powerful. And it's the only way significant change has ever been obtained in this country. So when we think back to John Lewis and Fannie Lou Hamer and other champions of voting rights in this country who forced LBJ, frankly, to sign into law the Voting Rights Act in 1965, we have to remember their persistence and their struggle lasted generations, decades, not just months or years. We have to have that same kind of tenacity and resolve and courage. And I know that we do. It's within us. We just have to stay this course and stay on it until we win.
Mr. O'Rourke, thank you so much for your time. I wanted to give you this last inkling of the time that we have together to clarify. I know last week in the Texas Tribune, you had spoke and you gave a quote about you running for governor in the upcoming election against Governor Abbott. You had originally said you weren't going to, and I just wanted to give you an opportunity to verbally say what your plans are and where you are at in that process.
Yeah, what I told the interviewer was that I love what I'm doing here at Texas State. I love what I'm doing with Powered by People, and I haven't made any plans to do anything else. But that leaves open the possibility that I could run for office. So a lot of that's going to be dependent upon where I can do the most good, and if that's staying tight right where I am, then so be it. If that's running as a candidate for office, including potentially for governor, then that's what we'll do. But right now, especially as we still have time left in this semester, I want to make sure I'm focused here at Texas State, focused on the voter registration work that we're doing. And then at some point in the future, I think this is something that I need to think through and will ultimately make a decision on.
Understood. Thank you so much again for coming on the podcast. It's been a pleasure talking with you. I told you beforehand that, it's kind of surreal. We talked about your election in 2018, senior year of high school, and now here I am having a conversation with you. I'm very grateful for you and your time. Is there anything else that you would like to say about your organization or anything you would like to shout out before we wrap up?
Well, first, thank you for having me. And I've been really impressed with the questions that you've asked, and looking forward to continuing to listen to the podcast in the future. I just love my time at Texas State. It's been a terrific experience. Very, very grateful for it. And I guess my shout out would be to my co-professor, Dr. Mora, who's just absolutely phenomenal, and the students in the Texas politics class. They're the absolute best. So if any of them are listening, keep up the great work. And Kim, thank you for having me on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. That's going to do it for this week's episode. You guys take care. See you next week. Bye.
Adios.